Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Scott Marcus, co-founder and CEO of Blue Zones Kitchen, CPG brand born out of the Blue Zones movement, which excited to dive into here in just a second. Prior to Blue Zones, Scott was the CMO at Vital Farms, where he led the prolific egg brand up to and through IPO, I believe, led savory snack brands like Planters and Triscuits under the big Kraft Mondelez umbrella. So got a lot of really great experience. Really excited to get into it. Scott, maybe just for kind of the listeners that aren't as familiar with Blue Zones Kitchen, just to start off, maybe you just give us a quick lay of the land in terms of origin story, why behind the brand. Obviously, I think probably important to touch on the Blue Zones movement as part of that, what the core product lineup looks like today, and maybe just throw out a few places that people can get their hands on them today, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. But first, thanks for having me, Adam. I really appreciate it. I've
Yeah,
been a fan and listening for quite a while now, and so it's fun to have this conversation and be part of the
absolutely.
show.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So the background on the Blue Zones is like, well, I guess the short version is that they're parts of the world known for longevity. What happened was a team of scientists led by Dan Buettner with National Geographic started finding and then researching these places where people were living to be not only centenarians, not only living long, but living really active, vibrant lives. And so they set out to see, well, what's going on here? What are the commonalities? Are the things that we can learn? And so that research began and led to Dan publishing his first article in National Geographic in 2005. And then, yeah, I brought props. The original Blue Zones book about those parts of the world in 2008. It's a concept. I guess now maybe call it a brand. But the Blue Zones has been around for 17, actually really more like 20 years. And so those parts of the world, often I say, well, have you heard of the Blue Zones? And they say no. And then they say, wait, isn't there something in like Japan or in the Mediterranean? And so the 5 Blue Zones are Okinawa in Japan, Ikaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy, the Nicoyan Peninsula in Costa Rica. And then Loma Linda, California is the US hotspot. And it's because it's a Seventh-day Adventist community. Because most of LA is really not a longevity hotspot, as you might
Right.
imagine. But the Seventh-day Adventists have a lot of really good lifestyle changes that help them live to be a long, healthy life. Um, Fast forward a number of years, the Blue Zones, name is out there. Dan writes a couple of cookbooks. His first one, the original Blue Zones Kitchen, about 5 years ago now, and what Dan recognized was that people really struggled with the eating wisely pillar of the Blue Zones. Um, you know, Moving naturally, people kind of get. You don't have to run a marathon or do CrossFit. You just should do things like gardening and walking the hills or walking the stairs in Sardinia. Having purpose, or ikigai as they call it in Okinawa, is something people kind of, I think, conceptualize. And then the fourth main pillar around community and family is pretty intuitive. But the eating wisely, like I said, is really where people struggle because our environment here is set up for fast food, junk food, ultra processed food. And so after writing the cookbook and recognizing the feedback, I think Dan started to focus more on the food aspects of Blue Zones, which led us ultimately a few years later to do what we do now, which is a line of meals that allow you to eat the Blue Zones way when you don't have time to cook. And so I would say, we'll get into it maybe a little bit more, but we launched in market in the fall of 2023, just over 2 years ago, on the heels of a Netflix documentary that Dan hosted called Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones. And that really, for a lot of people, built the awareness of Blue Zones. Again, it had been out there for 20 years technically, or 18 years at the time, but Netflix obviously has a lot of power. So having the awareness bump from Netflix was a really good time for us to launch in the marketplace. The Blue Zones principles are pretty intuitive. It's not biohacking. You don't have to do anything absolutely crazy. And so I think that's where a lot of people recognize seeing it in a easy to watch, all filmed documentary series. You kind of realize that, I can do this.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's totally accurate. You had such a prolific journey at Vital Farms. I'm just kind of curious, what was the the aha moment, or maybe it was kind of a long winding journey that ultimately led you to the conclusion, okay, Blue Zone's Kitchen is the next chapter you want to dedicate the next part of your career and life to.
Yeah, I think probably more journey than aha moment, but um, I think it's like a lot of things, a combination of passion and people. Um, when I say that, going back a little bit, of all the brands I worked at in the kind of craft Nabisco Mondelez world, where I really enjoyed the most were working on brands like Triscuit and Planters Nuts, which coincidentally are the cleanest ingredient products in that portfolio. It's wheat oil and salt in the Triscuit case, and it's nuts oil and salt in the case of Planters. And having had the opportunity to partner and create programs with peanut farmers and with nut farmers, that kind of really got me excited and readied me for when I was going to move on to recognize that I wanted to work on not only more nutritious food, but real food. And so, I always joke that I moved here to greener pastures at Vital Farms, um, and literally greener pastures, working with hundreds of egg farmers. And like you said, it was a fantastic journey for me, building the brand, building a marketing team, leading a fantastic sales team, and just kind of helping that brand to fulfill what it really is worth. And so having done that for 6 years, post IPO, felt like a time to move on to something new. And I didn't move too far, frankly. And so, maybe the passion piece is obvious, but from a people perspective, one of my co-founders is Matt O'Hare, who's the Vital Farms founder. He got to know Dan Buettner of the Blue Zones, and I think they had started to talk about the ability to bring Blue Zones into the food world, into grocery. And so when I started talking about moving on, Matt pulled me aside and brought me over here. So that's how we got started. For me, it's the perfect combination of an established and trusted brand in the Blue Zones, because it's based on research and trust and documentation for many, many decades, and the ability to build something new. But really, taking a page out of the playbook from my past, working directly with farmers to source a lot of our ingredients, making sure we can offer very delicious but nutritious, nutrient-rich product that we can really feel good about and
Yeah.
help society eat better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those dots connect in terms of what led you to where you are today. One question I'd had, just thinking about a bit of my journey too. So a few years back, as a co-founder of a company in the regulated cannabis space and in the California market, ultimately didn't end up working out as we had hoped for a variety of reasons. That could be a whole other multi-long hour conversation. But for a while we were the leader in the market. We're the number one brand in our category for I think like 3 years in a row, selling at a higher price point than most in our category. And I think the key reason that we were able to do so was in large part just because of the strong brand we had built by essentially co-branding with kind of craft regenerative small farmers that are up in Northern California area. And I think it's probably accurate to say that a much different, more conventional category and at a much larger scale, you built the Vital Farms with a similar story or strategy clearly resonated with your stakeholders as well. And I'm just kind of curious, because that just resonates so much with people, how can brands that may not have a business model that's just as easy to tell those kinds of stories? So it could be a beverage brand with a formulation that doesn't really include ingredients that come from small family farms, as an example. But how could they be able to still kind of leverage a similar strategy that may enable them to build a real connection with their consumers in a similar way when they just may not have, their business model doesn't lend to be able to tell similar stories? Does that question kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. For me, what it comes down to is, and anyone who's heard me kind of guest lecture anywhere or talk on a lot of SKU classes that I've done in the past, I always say the magic happens when what a brand offers and delivers with their product aligns with what their consumer needs, right? And that can mean a lot of different things. And it doesn't in our case, I'd say in the early days at Vital Farms, it was people very passionate about animal welfare. And I think in most cases, when brands start out, you find something very core and something that there's a small group of very passionate people for. And hopefully that becomes sort of that core base consumer that you can build from. But I'd say typically, and even in the case of Vital Farms, it's a very small number of people. It's not scalable. And so sort of classic, and I'm a total marketing geek. I go back to the marketing 101 textbooks. But if you think about the brand hierarchy, that sort of more emotional benefit is going to resonate, but not necessarily going to get people to commit their dollars. And the for better or worse, where the masses of people are, where the opportunity to scale is, tends to be further down on the pyramid, which is maybe product benefits, but often even just the attributes of what ingredients, what flavors are you offering. Maybe it's a protein or fiber. Though I'd say even I'll give you the examples in both Vital Farms and Blue Zone's Kitchen. We started off at Vital Farms really focused on animal welfare, talking about the amount of space the hens get. And that's still part of the messaging today, but um, we really had to broaden the message and make it much more focused on what people cared about, which is, in food, table stakes is taste, nutritional benefits, or, I think that's probably a better example in the Blue Zone's Kitchen space where we offer nutrients. And it really is, it's more about those functional attributes and benefits than the more emotional connection. Like there are people that are absolute Blue Zones followers, fans who have read all the books, watch all the documentaries, watch all the TED Talks. And I love those folks, but there aren't a lot of them. And
Right.
so when we go to market, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, getting people to see a product that looks delicious in the store and recognize what the recipe or the product's going to taste like at the right price value. I mean, the traditional P's have to work, the 4 P's have to work, and sometimes you can leverage the farm partnerships. I wish that was more of the case, then people really cared more about the way we partner with farmers or the impact on, a broader stakeholder or world. But the reality is people have to make choices with their dollars. And typically it's what's in it for me. And that's going to be taste, health, convenience for the most part.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Blue Zones is from what I know, a public benefit corporation, which I'm not sure how familiar the average consumer is about this. But for those that aren't that familiar with public benefit corporations, can you maybe just give super quick kind of rundown and what these are in comparison to a traditional C corp?
Yeah, yeah, and it's a topic I have a lot of fun with. I will state out front that I am not a lawyer, so this is the non-corporate
Fair.
lawyer definition or explanation of public benefit corporations, and very timely too, because just last week OpenAI announced that they are becoming a public benefit
Oh,
corporation
wow. I did not know
as
that.
they transition from nonprofit. So I would say, again, as a non-lawyer, the gist of it is that you're stating in your company charter that you're in business for more than just shareholder gains. And I think for many decades since the 70s, sort of the mantra has been that business exists for the increased value of stock or shares. And what the public benefit corporation designation allows you to do is say, hey, we've got a higher purpose. Not that you can't make money, and this is not a nonprofit designation at all. And the reality is, if you're not profitable, you cease to exist. And so the thing that you're benefiting, the cause that you're really getting behind, doesn't manifest itself. Um, I think it's more of a signal than anything else. I think there's debate, whether courts would uphold that.
Yeah.
But I think where it probably started was that there have been shareholder lawsuits in the past where people have sued a company or a board because the company didn't make every decision only about maximizing
Right.
short-term financial gains for the stockholder.
Right.
And I think what I've personally found and learned over the past 10 years in this side of the, the less corporate side of the business is that your business can actually be much more successful, much more financially successful if you do focus on other stakeholders and you do have more purpose, because consumers care, and because there are longer term outcomes that end up better for you than just saying, hey, I could save a couple of pennies this quarter or this year.
Yeah.
So I find it really valuable. Again, there's always a lot of debate about these things in the corporate circles and the legal circles, but I think for me, it's a signal to potential investors. It's a signal to potential employees, people we want to go hire, that we exist for a reason, and it's not just to make profit for the sake of making profit.
Yeah. That's really helpful. For some really early stage founders that have got the idea, they're about to go through this incorporation process, maybe they're considering going the public benefit route. Assuming you are familiar with certified B Corps as well, just for some of those founders that have heard of that one too, or maybe been putting more of a focus on that one, best way to kind of define the difference between the two, and then if you have a take on it, why might a company or a founder focus on one or the other? Or I know there are some that are both as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I did go through the B Corp certification process
Okay.
at Vital Farms, so yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that as well. Although it I'm sure morphed slightly over the past 8 years or so. Um, but so the B Corp certification, first of all, you don't have to be a corporation. You can do that at any type of entity. And I get it's also a signal to consumers or any outside stakeholders that you care about broadly society. I think there's test is the wrong word, but there's an application process to be certified as a B Corp,
Right.
and it involves governance. It involves how you treat employees. There's a piece of it around the community. There's a piece of it around the environment. Um, and there's a whole scoring structure around it. Just I think at this point, a whole cottage industry of consultants that help you master or even just apply because it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I'm largely a fan of it. I think what B Corp has done a decent job of is establishing the logo as something that people start to recognize, and so you see it on more and more packages, and it's sort of that symbol of trust that you find on a product on the shelves.
Yeah.
I think there's been recent debate about that certification because some people would say that now the large corporations are jumping in, and there's no way that they could uphold all those same benefits, and it's a scoring process, right? So you might score higher or lower in on some aspects,
Right.
and so it does get questioned, but everything does, and I think
Totally.
largely it's a good signal. It means that you care. And for that really small percentage of people that are dedicated to it, they'll look into it and say, "Well, what was your score, and where did you score well, and where did you not score well?"
Right.
But I think broadly, if you take a big step back, both of those things, PBCs and B Corps and other similar certifications are just good signals that a company is dedicated to a purpose beyond just profit.
Imagine it's a good screening mechanism as well for potential employees, potential investors, just every stakeholder that's involved, within an organization too, which is great.
Yeah, exactly.
Diving into the weeds a bit more in terms of Blue Zones, rewind back to some of those early days when you're kind of in the initial R&D formulation phase without really giving it away any core trade secrets. What were some of those kind of key variables you played around with, key tweaks you made along the way between the first versions and the versions that you knew were right for those first 4 bowls that you brought to market?
Yeah, wow, that takes me back. One interesting thing about the Blue Zones Kitchen journey to launch is that we actually moved really quickly, and I think we were able to do that because we just had a lot of experience. The last co-founder and my partner, Abby Coleman, she's our chief operating officer. She and I were the only two. Actually, today we're still the only two actual employees of the company
Oh,
all
wow.
these years later. But she and I met at Kraft about 20 years ago, so we had a similar background. And then we've got some fantastic folks supporting us on a contract basis who also are just very well experienced in the industry, and so that allowed us to move much more quickly than I think most would. And at least do our best to avoid the typical pitfalls. But yeah, for us it was a race to market from sort of initial concept to shelf was 8 or 9 months.
Wow.
Um, but along the way, I think to the gist of your question, we use the cookbooks as a starting point because we want to be really true to the recipes, the ingredients that people eat in the blue zones.
Right.
So a lot of the adjustments and tweaking we did are around, the naming conventions, but also, getting some insights around purchase intent, and some dishes are more prevalent, more interesting than others. And then there's the functional operational piece, which Abby always talked about us playing 4D chess, where there's just variables around, price and size or weight and ingredients and costs and, there is just sort of no perfect answer, but doing our best to complete the right package,
Yeah,
literally and physically and figuratively. And we ultimately felt good about the four meals that we launched. We pretty much had a recipe from each of the four main regions of the
okay,
world that have blue zones in them.
got it.
Which if anyone picks up, there's a slight color coding of our meals, and they indicate the different regions like Mediterranean, Asia Pacific, the Americas, and Latin America. So that's how we went about it. But I would say, we were as scrappy as anybody else, despite having decades of experience, and tried to use some insights without a significant budget and without a lot of time ahead of us. We were scrambling to make sure we hit shelf when that Netflix documentary dropped.
That makes sense. Yeah, you got a tight timeline there. You got to work around totally. In terms of those first four bowls that you launched, you guys recently launched four additional bowls more recently. Was that a similar process where the next four basically were from them same regions, or maybe just a more of a broad question as part of that? Like, what's the journey or process look like at Blue Zones that kind of leads to the decision to bring a new SKU to market after those initial four?
Yeah, I think it was a decision or a question around introducing more and the timing of introducing more. But I think I feel like we play in a category in meals or entrees where there's some variety seeking, and people are not going to want to eat the same meal over and over again.
Hmm.
Far different than in the egg business, where the same dozen carton of eggs could be pretty much your only SKU if you needed it
Right.
to be. And so, so we knew that if we had seen some early success, we should try to put some more products out there, appeal to more taste buds, and also get a little bit more of a brand block on shelf. And so, we did probably a little bit more homework that time around.
Okay.
And I'd say the key word for us in that next iteration of products was beyond the typical, like the obvious taste, purchase intent, financial viability. The other piece was really incrementality. And so, for us, we want to make sure that these are products that are not just going to cannibalize the first four. And certainly, in talking to retailers, we needed to demonstrate that these are products that you can put in addition to our initial items, and this is not a swap out. And so the combination of having some learnings as well as some good initial in market data was really helpful in just getting those sold in. We actually launched two of them earlier in the fall of, actually, I guess, the winter of 2024, and then the next
Okay.
two came out in September of this year. But the four of them hit shelves um, all at once in a lot of places.
Yeah. What would you say are generally some of the keys that are to a successful new product launch?
There's a lot there, right? For anyone who's in this business, starting, and I always kind of advise people, start and always go back to that connection between what your brand offers and what the consumer wants. So, like, is there a real need, and is it really connected to your brand? I maybe a different talk show, but there are so many brands that move into new categories really quickly. And every once in a while, it's the right adjustment or pivot, and you end up kind of building your business off that second or maybe even third iteration. But the idea that any small brand can succeed in multiple parts of the store, multiple categories, I would personally challenge any day.
Totally.
Um, so it really starts with that first piece, which is like, hey, is there a role for this? Is there a need for it? And then, as you reference, does this make financial sense? Is the price value there? Um, and then execution. You mentioned hitting timelines, hitting budgets, and execution is critical always, but especially in this industry where you're selling something in 9 sometimes a year, 9 months, sometimes a year before you're gonna hit the shelf, and if you miss a deadline, if you miss sending in your packaging on time, or if you miss a distributor deadline, you might be in the doghouse for another year.
Right.
And so, it's really important to be managing the timelines and the flawless execution, to hit the dates, and then to hit the financial milestones. And I'd say, in our case, giving ourselves some buffer, just being realistic about the things that could go wrong, both financially, maybe even if you didn't foresee tariffs, but financial flexibility and timeline flexibility, just build all that in and, give yourself the assumption that you're gonna miss something.
Talking about Blue Zones specifically, in terms of thinking back to those days when you were going through the visual brand identity, packaging design stage, what were some of the kind of key variables that were top of mind for you? Want to make sure were conveyed?
Yeah, I would say for packaging and true for Blue Zone's Kitchen, but true for just about any brand, branding slash brand block, I'd say obviously a really important piece. Like, what are you going to look like? What kind of presence are you going to build on the shelf? Um, a second one would be in food, at least appetite appeal. Like, you need to communicate. You can't just say we taste good. No one's going to believe that in words. So you really just have to show it because people
Right.
are making quick decisions.
Great point. Yeah.
Um, and the third, for me, and people who know me well know it's my favorite word. It's focus. What's that one thing that people are going to take away and recognize? Is it an ingredient? Is it a claim? Is it a feeling? Is it a taste? Whatever it might be. What's that one thing that people are going to pick up on as they're walking by in milliseconds, kind of scanning the shelf?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say those are for the big three for us. We ended up and we worked with Andy Kurtz at Buttermilk Creative, someone I've known for many years. Worked
Heard
together
great things. Yeah, heard
on
great
a
things.
few
Yeah.
different brands, and we ended up in an unusual place where I think typically you brand block based on either a color. I used to work on Ritz crackers, and the big block of red is the brand block of color, um, or you differentiate flavor with color, but then you've got something really prominent. Either it's an image of your product or more likely your logo that is the consistency. And we ended up in a little bit of a hybrid model where I'm looking back at our packaging, where we used a slight variation of color, but they still hold together cohesively and they feel like a family, but allow us to differentiate, like I was saying earlier, the various regional
Yeah.
cuisines. So it's kind of an unusual take, but so far it feels like it's working for us.
That's actually, it's funny you say that because that was the question I was going to ask you as you were talking about that in terms of having the brand block on shelf. It seems like it's kind of like historically you wanted to have that core solid brand color. You said, solid red color that dominates the shelf as you put more SKUs on the shelf. But more recently, it seems like brands have been leaning more towards kind of the rainbow effect. Any strong opinions on that and where how that trend has shifted?
Yeah, I mean, again, if I take a step back, and I know I'm maybe speaking against my own decisions recently, but generally, I'm not a fan of the rainbow effect. I think you've got such little time to get people to pick up on something, and if you can
Yeah.
at least own a visual, own the color, that just makes a lot more intuitive sense. If I certainly wouldn't have done what we did if there was a stark contrast of colors. I think kind of the more muted color palette that we went with allows them to feel cohesive, but um, yeah, maybe I should be debating myself a little bit. I'd say if anyone's starting a company now or getting on shelf for the first time, try to build as much of a presence, and color is the best way to do that. I mean, if you're a Nabisco brand, I mean, or a big CPG with the ability to just put as much product on shelf as you want, and you've got
Right.
that much of a presence, then you could probably get away with a little bit more. And honestly, it might work in different categories, like in ice cream. I think there are a lot of brands that, well, there's some examples of both in ice cream, but you know, the one that comes to mind is Jenny's for me, and
Hmm.
that the logo is so prominent and the packaging is so consistent that you could figure out the pink one versus the green one versus the orange one, and
Yep.
they do block well. I think less so when it's I don't know. At least in my experience in snacks, it feels a lot harder to be consistent. But
Yeah.
you
Totally.
know, I- I'm sure there are great success stories on both sides of it.
Right. There's always someone that breaks the rule and it works out for them. Talking about pricing a bit, and you can answer this in the context of Blue Zones and maybe Vital Farms would be helpful too. But just in general for other up and coming operators, and they're started thinking about price or maybe making some price adjustments. What's your kind of general strategy and or process for nailing down your go to market price?
Oh man, my favorite topic. Like I said, I'm like total geek and all this stuff. I remember, signing up and starting to take a pricing course in business school and thinking it was going to be this, heavy math, scientific kind of course, and it was purely psychological,
Right.
which is why I ended up loving it. And to this day, like I feel like pricing is probably my favorite aspect of launching in the marketplace, because it is so psychological. It's so much about um, value more so than price and
Right.
what people are willing to pay. Um, but a lot does go into it, and I think you always want to start with the consumer. In our journey here, it was kind of an assumption or a small range of what we thought that the market would pay for our brand and our quality product. A little bit of competitive benchmarking, but also so recognizing that there's obviously some expectations out there, but also that we're not offering the exact same thing that other people are offering. Um, but, as you know, you get into this business and you may have a perfect suggested retail price. Then you've got to back into, well, then what do I have to charge retailers, or even worse off, what do I have to charge distributors, who are then going to mark it up to the retailer, who are then going to seek a certain margin. And so you've got to make a lot of assumptions around what the retailer is going to decide to charge, because we don't get to make that call. So a lot of assumptions, a lot of math, and then, back up from there. All right, so now I've got to charge, the distributors, X. Can I afford to do that?
Right.
What are my costs of goods today and my freight today? And what do we think it will really be once we get to, a decent run rate? And then, the real question is, do we have a business model? And
Right.
I've worked with and advised some small brands in the past couple of years that, frankly, just there is no real business model. There's no margin in it unless you can demonstrate the ability to charge far more than, is typical in the marketplace. And then the
Right.
question is, can you? Like,
Right.
is that really a thing? And is there a story behind it, or is there a
Yeah.
quality behind it? Like, what is that? So yeah, it's I've been fortunate to work on this brand with Blue Zones. Vital Farms was a premium product, and I think part of the puzzle is establishing your value with price. I used to have people come up to me when I first got to Vital Farms and say, "Oh, I buy your eggs," and I'd ask them why, because I wanted to learn from them, and they would say, "Oh, because they're the expensive ones; they must be good." Like, well, luckily we did back it up with a really good product, but some people didn't know that. They just said, "You know what? It's $2 more than the others. There must be something good about this. I'm gonna put in my cart."
That's so interesting. So interesting. Let's just say a brand's been in market for a while. You can use Vital Farms as a reference, or maybe Kraft, because you had so many different SKUs and product lines. I imagine there's a lot of tweaking of prices along the way and periodic reviews of pricing. What data points kind of lead you to decide, or make a recommendation that a brand should increase the price or decrease price?
Oh, man, changing prices is never easy, or never something I like to do, either
Yeah.
in either direction. Um, I think for the most part, it tends to be increases, and they tend to be based on realities of costs increasing, and
Hmm.
that's sort of is what it is. And obviously, if it's known, if it's that a certain commodity that is part of your food has gone up and the whole world knows about it, it's easier to increase price without pushback from the retailers or distributors. Um, if it's less known, or if it's for an internal reason, it's obviously a lot harder to pass along. And then you have to understand the impact that's going to have on your business. We're going
Right.
to see a 20% loss of volume because I raised my price by 10%. Um, and there are ways to study that, but they tend to be really expensive. And so, not the best thing to do unless you absolutely need to do it. And then at least try to get some kind of read from your core consumers. Like, are they willing to go along
Right.
with it?
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
on the flip side, if you're lowering your price, you've probably done something wrong to start.
Right. Totally.
I mean, arguably, there's some big cases where you just had to charge a significant premium until you got to some scale, and then you're able to lower your price and kind of reach a broader audience. So there could be a role for that, but I think it's relatively rare, but certainly easier to sell into retailers and your consumers are likely not going to abandon you if you lower your price.
Right.
But then watch your financials, right? Like then
Right.
now, did I just squeeze my own margins or lower my contribution enough that I can't pay my bills?
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, try to get
Is
the
the
pricing
potential
right
increased
and
volume making up for
not
that?
mess with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the concept of pricing. I don't like the idea of having to mess with it. Like
Totally.
try to get it right and keep it for a really long time in the marketplace.
Yep. I think that's a good approach. Shifting gears a little bit, talking about distributors and brokers for a minute, which are such a core piece of the puzzle. It seems like, a lot of operators kind of have a lot of, I don't know, frustrations with distributors for maybe they're, tacking on fees and the invoices they get back are way less than they thought. But feels like there can also be such great relationships you can have with a distributor, and they're just such a key part of your business that can really propel you to new heights. How can a brand, from your experience, just kind of truly partner with their distributor to maximize success?
Yeah, distributor is a great question because we don't talk much about that. We talk about partnering with retailers. I know we'll talk soon about brokers as well, but yeah, I mean, if I think about distributors as a stakeholder, right, and in the broadly the stakeholder model of
Yeah.
how do you want to build relationships, how do you want to treat partners, um, I think like any of those relationships, clear, open communications is going to be a piece of it. And that means that yes, if you see something that that doesn't look right or you shouldn't have been charged for, having that ability to communicate that. But it also really comes down to execution and frankly doing what you say you're going to do or doing what is expected of you. So if you miss deadlines or if you don't deliver the right amount of product on the right dates that was promised, well, that's not going to start the relationship off right. And there's obviously a lot of chatter about some of the distributors charging a lot of fees, and in a lot of cases they are incorrect, whether it's intentional or not.
Right.
So I don't want to gloss over that. That's an important part of the business and something everyone's got to pay attention to. But yeah, there is the ability to have a really good relationship with the big distributors. There
Yeah.
are programs where they recognize fast growing and brands that have potential and put them on stage and let them showcase their products. And maybe in less frequent, but there's the occasional case where the distributor does help you get into some more distribution. So yeah, listen, it's important. Those relationships tend to be more stressed than a lot of the other relationships in the business, but you're right. I mean, we should be looking to build the best
Yeah.
relationships with all of our partners.
Totally. When does it make sense to engage a broker or brokers from your experience?
Yeah, I've got maybe a little bit of a different take on
Okay.
brokers.
All right.
And I've worked with and today I do work with some brokers and some really fantastic ones. Um, Broadly, I think what's really important is that the founder or founding team, and then some level of a company's salesperson or sales team be involved. Um, in our case, I work with Jonathan and Scout CPG, but there are kind of external sales organizations that can act on your behalf and really extend your team without having to hire everyone internally. And I just find that more beneficial in the early days because their focus is solely on your brand, your business. They're looking to grow, but grow strategically in places where you could be successful, where financially it makes sense. Whereas, in some cases, the brokers have really great relationships with the buyers and the retailers, which people seek, right? That's important. But if that relationship is really, close and cozy, who are they really, looking to help out the most?
Mhm.
They're going to help that buyer relationship, which frankly is probably a longer term and will be a longer term relationship, or they kind of they're really more to help you as the brand. And so,
Right.
like I said, there are fantastic brokers out there. Um, I've since Vital Farms days and here as well, have some small regional partners. Sometimes it's for one specific retailer that they're experts at, or maybe just a region of the country where we don't have the bandwidth or expertise. And so there's a role, and I think brokers do a really great job because there's so much paperwork to be done. There's so many reviews to keep keep top of mind, and you don't want to miss back to missing deadlines. And
Right.
so they can play a role, but as a small startup, the first go-to for me is either having a salesperson internally or having a sales agency that is an extension of my team.
How can a brand diligence or validate a broker's retail relationships to make sure they're real and are actually going to prove fruitful for you? And is there a way to really do that? I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to the extent that we've hired brokers of over my recent past, a lot of it is, I think there's some great word of mouth or great referrals, and we started this whole conversation about both passion and people, and it is very much a people business, and so getting referrals from people you trust,
Yeah.
in ideally in the industry, is certainly the best way to go. I think it's easy to fall into wanting a partner or a broker partner that has a big name or some cachet, feels exciting. But certainly, get to know the if you don't have a referral, get to know the people, understand what else is in their portfolio, or their kind of like-minded brands, and then you know to some extent you might have to test the waters. That I always tell folks to recognize that, um, like I said earlier, the relationship that those brokers have with the retailers, are longer standing, and in a lot of cases
Yeah.
stronger ties than they have to you. And so, kind of feeling out how that broker is going to represent you, what their priorities are, and then manage it closely, because the incentive for a lot of those organizations is to sell more volume, because very often if it doesn't start out on a commission basis, it becomes a commission basis.
Right.
Um,
Totally.
and I don't necessarily want to be in every retailer. There are many cases where I'm not going to be ready for X retailer until maybe year 3 or 5 or 10,
Right.
or maybe never. It's just not the right consumer fit. It's too costly to do business. It's not a geography I'm prepared to support, whatever it might be. And so you've got to really participate and communicate closely with any broker partner to make sure that you guys are on the same page with the strategy, and it's not just a kind of go out and sell at all costs.
Right. Totally. Shifting back more, a bit more of the Blue Zones world specifically. Brand obviously plays in the frozen section. Definitely seems like this category is having a bit of a moment right now, getting a lot of attention. I'm just kind of curious what's unique about this category as you started playing in it, and then also why do you feel like this general category is having a bit of resurgence?
Yeah, I think it's a category. The frozen meals specifically is a category that was ready for some refresh. I grew up a kid of the '80s eating TV dinners, and it was a treat, because I got to watch TV. Literally, I remember watching the World Series, with my dad with the TV dinner on a tray in front of me. But from a treat perspective, the ingredients were also the same. It was a dessert pocket. There was tons of preservatives, and I can't imagine how much sodium was in those things back then. And so, you know, there was so much opportunity to revise and kind of reshape what frozen is. Because the reality, and I think people are starting to realize this, is that frozen food, first of all, maybe it's starting with fruits and vegetables, but people are increasingly recognizing that you can lock in nutrients, you can lock in freshness, and you lock in taste by freezing. And maybe the technology's probably gotten better now than it was in the '80s. So,
Yeah. Right.
so maybe there was a little bit more need for preservatives back then. Um, but at least for where we are today, the ability to lock in taste, freshness, nutrients, avoid food waste, and not just food waste from a consumer perspective, food waste from a retailer perspective, food waste at the distributor, and food waste in the manufacturing side, because the shelf life obviously is much more extended.
Right.
Um, and then, what we always say at Blue Zone's Kitchen is the convenience is why we exist. We want everyone to pick up Dan's books and, cook from scratch. But in our society, we don't always have time to do that. And so by having something on hand in the freezer, whether it's your leftovers, or one of our meals, at least you can make the easy choice a better choice than what you had in the past.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the resurgence is because it's just a reality that we can offer really great, tasty, and healthy foods in the freezer with the convenience that's just needed in our society. I think younger consumers have seen it, and they were children of the pandemic. So frozen was really important at that point, and really kind of took a nice boost. So there's a lot of trial happening in frozen during COVID,
Mm.
and so that cohort recognized it. A lot of them are shopping at Trader Joe's, frankly, and so there's an opportunity for the rest of the grocery landscape to pick up on some of that. And then amongst older consumers, there's a little bit of an education that needs to happen that, hey, come on back. This isn't your father's or your
Yep.
grandfather's TV dinner. Like, there's some good stuff here now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it does seem like, there is a bit of a cleanup in the frozen aisle for sure, and I'm glad to be part of it.
For maybe early stage founder that's considering building a brand focused on this frozen category, what's something that one or two things that come top of mind that they should really keep top of mind as they're thinking about entering into this category?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the supply chain is what comes to mind. There are steeper costs to shipping frozen goods, to storing everything frozen, ensuring that that continuous supply chain or cold chain exists, that your product stays high quality and fresh. So that's probably the obvious. Um, I think the other reality is just that in most retailers, frozen meals these days are behind glass doors, and so there's just there's less browsing, there's less impulse purchase. It's certainly not a it's not a super fast moving category. It's not the slowest, but you're not going to get velocities like you do in on some of the perimeter categories. And so, yeah, how do you just let people know that you exist, that you're there, because they're not as easily just going to find you,
Yeah.
kind of wandering the aisles.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you have to work a little bit harder. But I get a lot of questions around, why would you want to do frozen? It's such a challenging category, and I think the reality is every category is challenging in one way or
Totally.
the other. If there were no real challenges, everyone would be doing it, and then the competition would be the extra challenge, right? Like,
Right. Exactly.
there's
Totally.
always something.
There's always something. There's always something. You talked about it can be harder for consumers to find brands in this category just because of the way it is. I'm curious, um, any thoughts that might come to mind in terms of if you had magic wand, you could kind of design what the overall kind of entire frozen section looks like in the average retailer? Any thoughts around how the layout can be improved or ways that could help improve discovery?
I would love to take a page out of the Trader Joe's model and take the doors off,
Totally. Great
and
point.
I'm sure there's definitely, an alignment there, and probably some causation where people are just picking up more meals because they're readily accessible, they're easy to find and easy to see. So that's a big piece of it, and I think, the other piece is just as we were talking about the shifting landscape and kind of the shift towards cleaner, better for you, but still really delicious options in the frozen category. It's still so heavily weighted towards the traditional big CPG players, um, and I think that's what we'll see it over time. You think to other big categories that have been really shaken up, and from soda with Olipop and Poppy taking on Coke and Pepsi, Chomps and New Primal and other brands taking on the legacy Slim Jims and other meat snacks. Um, and so there's definitely an opportunity for a real revolution as opposed to an evolution in this category.
Totally.
Um, I'm not sure what that tipping point will be, but at some point, I think there'll be, less doors of the traditional stuff, the same old stuff, the chicken and some kind of sauce stuff, and more variety out there.
Yeah, totally. Scott, last question for you. You've been in the CPG world for such a long time. You have just a great pulse in the world. Outside of what you're focused on at Blue Zones, any other brands or just trends in general in the CPG world that have kind of got you excited or piqued your interest or things you're kind of watching?
Oh man, I mean, it's such a fun industry and category to be part of because we all eat, and so it's part of daily life. I spend way too much time in grocery stores.
Yeah,
I take more than anything, just hopeful that people start to pay more attention to the nutrients and the things that really matter. I feel like protein is an easy trend for people to want to latch onto because it enables you to eat more bacon cheeseburgers. But that's the same reason that the Atkins trend took off, right? Like,
sure.
oh, I can now eat lots of bacon. And and people lose sight of what's actually important and where we we are falling short as a culture, which is, fiber and vitamins and minerals, hydration.
Yeah.
Even when you talk about the GLP-1 patients, few people on those, which I'm sure can do a lot of great good things for society, but people are using it as a shortcut and not putting in the work to say drink extra water and work out and lift and eat a well-rounded diet, not just more protein. So I'm just hopeful that there's a little bit more kind of focus and resurgence on overall nutrition.
Yeah.
That's what food should be offering, not just calories, but actual nutrition. And I mean, the reality is we can make really healthy things taste really good, and they
Totally.
do. I think my lesson from planters and Vital Farms is that the the it's not a choice between taste and health. Very often, the healthiest things actually have more flavor, more taste, and so it's a win-win. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing more of that in the marketplace.
I agree with that for sure. Good way to close it. But yeah, Scott, this has been great. Really appreciate the time. What's the best place for, I guess, one, people to follow along with youth, and then best place these days to follow along with everything that's going on with Blue Zone's Kitchen?
Sure. Well, Blue Zone's Kitchen is across media, so find Blue Zone's Kitchen on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and LinkedIn. Um, I'm mostly focused on LinkedIn personally, and if I could ever be of help to anyone, or just be a sounding board, like I said, I love the industry, and helping out small brands and startups is something I've been doing since I moved to Austin, and yeah, happy to do it. So reach out anytime on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
And thanks for
Appreciate it.
having
It's
me,
been
Adam.
great. I think that's the pod.
All right.